You spend your modern life obsessing over organic juice cleanses and filtered water, while your ancient ancestors pumped cold, raw alcohol into their 4-year-old children every single morning. I am a priest of the embalming house. I spend my days pulling brains through nasal cavities with iron hooks and scraping liver rot out of dead royalty. Trust me when I say this. Ancient human biology was a horror show, and the parents were the ones directing it. You look at the pyramids and imagine a majestic empire of golden light and brilliant architects. I look at the pyramids and smell the fermented vomit of a toddler who had 3 bowls of thick, sour ale before he learned how to speak. They did not give children beer because they were terrible parents, although most of them certainly were by your sensitive modern standards. They gave children beer because the Nile River was a floating sewer of dysentery, dead cattle parasites, and human waste. Drinking liquid straight from the bank was a fast track to exploding intestines and an early visit to my linen-wrapped operating table. So Egyptian mothers made a daily choice: slowly poison their kids with alcohol or watch them bleed out from the gut by noon. The stuff we brewed was not the crisp, cold lager you buy in aluminum cans at the local gas station. It was a thick, lukewarm, chunky porridge that looked like raw sewage and tasted like fermented yeast mixed with swamp dust. We fed it to infants through clay pipes before their teeth even broke through their gums. By the time a kid was 8 years old, he had a permanent buzz and a liver that looked like it belonged to a 50-year-old dock worker. And yet, this disgusting alcoholic slop was actually the only reason our civilization managed to build a single stone monument without dying off completely. Because locked inside that sour, bubbly liquid was a lethal secret weapon that saved millions of lives, and nobody back then even understood how it worked. To understand why a mother would pour sour beer down a screaming baby's throat, you have to understand the disgusting reality of our holy river. The Nile was our god, our highway, our bathwater, and our main trash dump. Upstream, cattle pissed directly into the current, while thousands of workers washed blood and mud from slaughtered goats. Downstream, families dipped their earthenware jars into the exact same spot to gather water for dinner. If you drank that raw water, microscopic parasites tore your stomach apart from the inside out within 48 hours. I know this because I spent 20 years scooping liquefied guts out of corpses who thought they were too tough for the local brewery. Fermentation was our crude, accidental version of chemical warfare against invisible aquatic monsters. When we baked sour barley bread, crushed it into clay pots, and let it rot under the blazing African sun, magic happened. The natural alcohol and acidic bacteria killed off the deadly parasites that turned human intestines into soup. The beer was disgusting, full of dead flies, floating husks, and gritty sand that wore your teeth down to the nerves by age 20. To make it go down easier, we mixed in crushed dates, honey, and sometimes stale ox urine to speed up the bubbling process. Imagine waking up at 6 in the morning, 6 years old, and having your mother hand you a clay bowl of warm, foul-smelling, urine-infused bread slop. You drank it down because the alternative was writhing on a dirt floor, shitting yourself to death while your family prayed to a dog-headed statue. It was a brutal biological trade-off. Live with a permanent mild concussion from the ethanol, or die violently before you hit puberty. Every child walking through the dusty streets of Memphis was completely hammered, staggering around with red eyes and bloated bellies. And just when you think this was the absolute peak of ancient medical stupidity, the priests decided to make the recipe even worse. Our brewers were not scientists. They were dirty, superstitious opportunists who thought air bubbles were tiny spirits blessing the mash. Because they did not clean their clay fermentation pots, thick layers of toxic black mold grew along the inside walls. This mold dropped directly into the beer that small children chanked down every single afternoon before performing hard labor in the fields. Modern lab tests on my embalmed mummies revealed that our sour beer was packed with heavy doses of tetracycline, a powerful natural antibiotic. We were accidentally pumping our children full of prescription drugs inside their daily morning booze. It cured their respiratory infections while simultaneously destroying their kidneys and pickling their growing brains. If you are enjoying this morbid tour of ancient child abuse and want to ensure your soul survives the judgment of Osiris, subscribe right now before Amit comes to devour your heart. Because the pharaohs ruled over millions of functional alcoholics who were too dizzy and medicated to realize how miserable their lives actually were. A 4-year-old girl would stagger out to herd geese, high on tetracycline mold and cross-eyed from 3% alcohol volume. Parents did not see this as a problem. They saw it as a divine blessing from the goddess Hathor, the patron deity of drunkenness. In fact, if a child refused to drink his daily ration of thick, sour brew, his parents did not ground him. They assumed a desert demon had possessed his stomach, and their cure for demon possession was far more terrifying than the beer itself. When a toddler spat out his daily beer ration, the local priest was called in to perform an immediate biological purge. If the kid would not take the alcohol through his mouth, we simply pumped it through the other end, using hollow reeds and ox bladders. Medical enemas were our favorite cure for everything, from sunstroke to temper tantrums. We filled dried sheep intestines with sour, unfiltered beer, wedged the nozzle into a crying 6-year-old, and squeezed. The logic was flawless in our minds. If the upper stomach is possessed by a water demon, flood the lower intestines with holy booze until the demon drowns. Naturally, this frequently ripped the child's intestinal lining to shreds and introduced raw bacteria directly into their bloodstream. I processed dozens of small bodies in the mummification tent who died not from the original sickness, but from our priest-approved alcohol enemas. When they died, we did not blame the beer, the mold, or the bladder pipes covered in horseflies. We simply claimed the child had displeased the gods, packed their tiny thoracic cavities with salt, and charged the grieving parents 2 copper rings for the linen wrap. Life was cheap, copper was expensive, and sour barley was the only thing standing between our species and total extinction. Even the royal children inside the air-conditioned stone palaces were not safe from this nightly routine of liquid torture. The prince's wet nurse would dip her nipples in concentrated, bitter beer dregs to force the infant to stop crying and go to sleep. A future king of Egypt spent his first 3 years on Earth perpetually sedated, drooling on silk sheets while his brain soaked in ethanol. This continuous stream of childhood alcohol intake caused a massive hidden health crisis across the entire civilization that no historian talks about. It altered the physical bone structure of our people in a way that I saw every time my bronze blade sliced open a fresh corpse. When I sliced open the abdomens of 40-year-old men, their livers were as hard and gray as the granite blocks of Abu Simbel. Their teeth were smoothed down to flat, yellow stumps, smashed flat by the crushed granite dust mixed into the daily beer bread. Their bones were brittle, porous, and twisted, warped by decades of severe vitamin deficiencies and constant, mild alcohol poisoning. The great builders of the ancient world were broken, half-blind, stone-deaf alcoholics who rarely lived past their 35th birthday. You look at our gold masks and painted sarcophagi in your sterile, air-conditioned museums and feel a sense of profound romantic awe. I look at those same artifacts and remember the horrific stench of fermented vomit dried into the linen wrappings of 7-year-old princesses. The glorious, immortal kingdom of the Nile was built by terrified, wasted children who drank liquid garbage because the pure water would kill them. So the big question remains, did the daily beer save ancient Egypt, or did it slowly rot the empire from the inside out until it collapsed? The brutal reality is that it did both. Without the antibacterial rot in that sour, cloudy brew, dysentery would have wiped our cities off the map before the first pyramid was even drawn in the sand. It was a terrible, filthy, miraculous poison that kept humanity breathing just long enough to build monuments out of rock. The next time you open your pristine refrigerator, pour a glass of crystal clear, clean water, and complain about your modern life, remember my world. Your ancestors survived by feeding their toddlers moldy, urine-spiked ale out of cow bladders, just so they could live to see another sun. Be grateful you live in a world where turning 6 years old does not require a liver transplant.